Good evening. I'm happy to be addressing you all one more time. The State of the Union is a very exciting topic to speak on, and today I will speak to you about a core aspect, and that is that of leadership. Leadership per se defines the worth and vitality of either a nation or a corporation. And given that political governance and corporate governance are like the face and the obverse of a coin, one can't be seen in isolation of the other. In today's elocution, I will speak to you on a seven-dimensional perspective of what it takes to be a great leader. What are the essential ingredients of leadership per se? At the outset, let me hone in the first point with an exemplar right out of home. In the mid-80s, when I was a very young graduate student in the United States, I was very lucky to be a student of Professor Gilbert Huebner, an extremely distinguished economist, was a council member of the Economic Advisory Council to the President, was in the Philadelphia National Bank as its president, had served in the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, and above all, was a fabulous academician, a teacher who wanted to make his students learn. Somewhere after the midterm, sometime in October, he hailed me to his office, and when I did go, I was pleasantly surprised because he asked me straight off, "Where did you get that analytical mind from?" I was pleasantly surprised, and then I told him that both my parents were highly educated, both had been scholars in their own right, my father as a trained economist, and my mother as a botanist, and over the years they had always inculcated in me the need to understand what I learned, and this was in sharp contradistinction to the prevailing norm of Indian academia then, and very much so even today, that of rote learning. In sharp contradistinction, I was made to understand everything, and I remember my father saying to me that the grade you get in a test is just an indicator. It is an indicator of two things. One, your ability to grasp a subject fundamentally, and two, the extent to which the teacher wants to teach. That's the simple fact about it. If you have a very pedestrian teacher, he would expect you to rote learn. And unfortunately for me, a major part of my schooling in India, I should say, was under lesser mortals. I can hardly think of a few teachers at school and college who set exemplary examples and who actually made me want to learn. Much of my learning came from home. And he said, well, it's observable, and the greatness of the American education is here. He immediately called the professor of organizational behavior himself a great organizational behavior theorist, and he said that I'm sending Kishore to you now. I would like you to run off a psychometric test for him. An hour and a half later, I came back to Professor Huebner's room, and he told me, my gut feel is right. You've just aced the analytical part. Therefore, these 4 or 5 professions would be ideally suited for you. Luckily, I had already chosen one of them, and I was on the path to success. But this is the fundamental issue. Most people I meet, in business or otherwise, always tell me that all their lives they wanted to do this, but unfortunately by a quirk of fate or circumstances, they are doing something else. In other words, whilst their core competencies and passions were in one area, they were in a completely another facet, and this led to a lot of discord, and they were not able to get themselves to work at 100% efficiency. So identifying your core competencies is the first facet of leadership. If you want to be a leader in the facet you are in, you will have to ensure that you are working in an area of your core competency. This leads me to the second point, which is all about plotting the present and the future based on your core competencies. Here again, I'll have to give you an example right from home, and the fact of the matter remains that my immediate older brother was a superstar academician right through, and trained to be a medical doctor in India, and since his passion lay in chemistry, he went on to the United States to do research in biochemistry, eventually developed mutants, some of which are being used today by laboratories in the United States and the European Union to crack diseases like AIDS and cancer. The genesis of this is very interesting. I distinctly remember I had just finished my 7th grade and he had finished his 11th grade. And he was all set to go to university at that point in time. And I distinctly remember both my parents having a caucus with him, and they actually enabled his future. We are very gifted because having such wonderful parents actually provides us with a lot of advantages. This then leads me to the third point, which is very important from a developing country perspective or an emerging market perspective, if you will. Countries like Brazil, Russia, China, India, the Koreas, all of them have similar issues, and this is zero tolerance to failure. Let me explain this. You see, in most of these countries I named, there is a lot of corruption and cronyism. So just being smart apropos your business or your entrepreneurial vertical need not necessarily make you the superstar. There could be a lot of sideshow activity which may not be completely above board, but which are ways which are patronized entirely, and as a natural consequence of that, truly smart people can be languishing in the wayside. So failing in the BRIC countries is very normal, because if you have an ethical mindset, it's very difficult to do unethical things. And in most of these countries, the corruption index is very high and there's a lot of cronyism as well. But if you still zealously work in your area of core competency, after having developed a sensible plan, despite the huge failure, you will still come through. I still remember my mother saying to me about 15 years ago, after I had lost out on a deal for no fault of mine. She said this. She said, treat this as a great learning experience, critically analyze everything, and work out a strategy. Remember, now that you've had failure, you will actually enjoy the success when you do get there. Something so bitterly stated over 50 years ago by Professor Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. He said then that success is the final step in the ladder of failure, and it is so very true in the Indian context. This leads me to the fourth point, which is very crucial towards achieving whatever one wants to, whatever be the vertical you operate in. And that is all about saying no to 99 things. When I first returned to India, I was besieged with a lot of opportunity from the educational verticals. Even politicians invited me to be on board, and I had standing invitations from large corporations to be on their boards. For a while, I did confabulate. I did ideate within myself. Felt good about the fact that I had all these invites. But then something dawned on me saying that I've set my agenda in the entrepreneurial verticals, and therefore I'll have to see it through to a logical conclusion before I do anything else at all. This has actually got me going, and this has actually helped me a lot by making my mind extremely uncluttered, which then leads me to the fifth point, which is in effect a natural extension of the fourth point and my way of doing business. My way of doing business is compassionate capitalism. And compassionate capitalism is all about creating opportunities for yourself, even whilst you're creating opportunities for your team as well. So in terms of value addition, whilst you gain, the rest gain as well. Whether it's knowledge or economic empowerment, they're all shared, and this leads to a lot of bonhomie and ultimate achievement. Compassionate capitalism is so important in the BRIC countries because very often employees, vendors, the local communities, all of them are ignored, and the owners of the capital walk away with the entire value addition, and this leads to a lot of disgruntlement, and for certain motivation levels are very low. Therefore, compassionate capitalism is a way to actually get an organizational functional, and from a national perspective, it is a solid way to reducing the inequality gaps, which is predominant in all these 5 countries. Extension of compassionate capitalism is inclusive growth, because when you do empower the stakeholder, empowering stakeholderism is the precept, inclusive growth happens very naturally, and right from the employees to the stakeholders, the vendors, and the rest of the stakeholders, all of them tend to gain, and growth becomes a reality. This is very, very crucial, which then leads me to the 6th and seminal point, which is you can only lead by example. The fundamental truth about all nations and corporations is that a leader will be respected only when he leads by example. Let me give you an example. In the early 80s, when the IT industry was just off its embryonic stage, an entrepreneur in a state north of the state I live in India started an entity with an ideation and a lot of commitment. He rallied around his team, gave them stock shops, ensured that all of them profited. And today it is India's finest multinational. I am indeed talking of Infosys and Mr. Narayana Murthy, who actually led by example, whether it was handling a customer overseas or in sharing the wealth. He ensured that he led by example, and it was all done in a very democratic way. Authoritarian democracy ought to give way to the authority of democracy, and in the corporate governance verticals, Narayana Murthy justified that statement, which then leads me to the 7th cardinal precept, continuous learning. And once again, I'll have to go into the history of an Indian CEO, and a lady at that, who actually is today a global outperformer. When she was in the Boston Consulting Group, she understood that continuous learning is one of the most effective tools to achieve sustainable development. Still later, when she went to Pepsi, she made it a learning organization, learning across verticals, And today, Indira Nooyi is considered as one of the finest exemplars of CEOs anywhere in the world and one of the most respected companies in the world today. Indira Nooyi has stated several times that the paradigm of continuous learning is the mantra which has made her an outperformer. So, friends and colleagues, I have given you the 7 precepts of dimensional leadership, and leaders are, in my opinion, made. A few are born, perhaps, but a vast majority of them are made. And if you follow the 7 precepts which I have just enunciated, you are going to be the leader of tomorrow. Take care. Have a wonderful week ahead. See you again soon.